All right, so today we're reading about World War One. I'll read this off to you. Number 1, when did World War I start? 2, who was assassinated? 3, opinion. Name 2 different nations you think were friends before / during World War One. 4, opinion. Why were European nations and Japan building up their military forces? 5, opinion. Which of the other names for World War One do you like the most? And 6, when the United States entered World War One. And then page 2 we'll get after we read page 1. World War I was started on the 28th of June, 1914, by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his pregnant wife Sophia. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph and the heir to the throne of Austria and Hungary. The assassination was planned by a Serbian terrorist group called the Black Hand. Although the assassination of Franz Ferdinand started World War I, that was only the immediate cause. Differences over foreign policy between the major world powers was the underlying cause of the war. World War I had many causes. A tangle of alliances made between countries to maintain a balance of power in Europe, which brought about the scale of the conflict. Countries were building their military forces, arms, and battleships, and countries wanted to regain lost territories from previous conflicts and build empires. World War I was known by a number of different names. Other names for World War I include the War to End All Wars, the War of the Nations, WW1, and the Great War. In 1915, the British passenger ship Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine, and all 1,195 passengers, including 128 Americans, lost their lives. Americans were outraged and put pressure on the U.S. government to enter the war. President Woodrow Wilson wanted a peaceful end to the war, but in 1917, when the Germans announced that their submarines would sink any ship that approached Britain, Wilson declared the United States would enter the war. The United States entered the war on April 6 of 1917. All right, question 1 on page 2. How many soldiers died in World War I? What did the chemical sulfur mustard do to the skin? 3, how long did the United States participate in actual combat? 4, what was one reason for World War I ending? And 5, by the end of the war, which empires had collapsed? 8 million soldiers died in World War I, and 21 million were injured. 65 million troops were mobilized during the war. 8 million troops died, and 21 million troops were wounded. Chemical weapons were first used in World War I. The chemical mainly used was sulfur mustard gas, which, after exposure, will eventually change the skin into yellow blisters. The United States only spent 7.5 months in actual combat. The U.S. was in the war in actual combat for only 7.5 months, during which time 116,000 were killed and 204,000 were wounded. By 1918, German citizens were striking and demonstrating against the war. The British Navy blocked German ports, which meant that thousands of Germans were starving and the economy was collapsing. Then the German Navy suffered a major mutiny. After German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated on November 9th of 1918, the leaders of both sides met at Champagne in France. The peace armistice was signed on November 11th. By the end of the war, the 4 empires, Russian Empire, Ottoman Empire, German Empire, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire had collapsed because of the war. All right, go on to answer those questions if you would, please.